The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Andrea McMaster.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. Glad that you could be with us today. This boy is 9 years old and can't speak a word. He isn't toilet trained. He often cups his hands over his ears and rocks steadily back and forth. His primary means of communication is hitting himself. We're talking about a young boy who has severe autism. Each year, 1 in 150 U.S. children are diagnosed with autism. And today on Consider This, we're going to talk about this disorder and hear about some treatment options. We're joined by Dr. Wayne Fisher, who's the director of the Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at the Monroe-Meyer Institute at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Glad that you could be with us today, Dr. Fisher. I know that you arrived more than a year ago to help develop really a world-class autism program here, and autism disorders often, as you know, leave loved ones and those treating them puzzled, but you've helped bring in your research hope to many. So glad that you could be with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And also Gail Werner Robinson, who is the founder and CEO of the GWR Wealth Management and a mother of 2 sons on the spectrum of autism, and we're glad that you could be with us as well today. You also have founded the GWR Sunshine Foundation, aimed at helping financially support programs for those with autism. So I'm glad that you could be here too and give us that personal perspective of really what it's like. Dr. Fisher, I want you to begin with talking about defining autism.
Sure.
How common is it? And is it overdiagnosed? We're hearing so much more about it today than we ever have.
Sure. Well, I was a part of the team of researchers that did the first population-based prevalence study of autism in the United States. And when we did that, that was over 25 years ago now, we had a different set of diagnostic criteria, and they were more narrow, and so fewer kids were diagnosed using those criteria. And so it's a little bit comparing apples and oranges in terms of what was going on then and what's going on now. But in spite of that, we see there's probably a number of things contributing to the number of kids that are being diagnosed now. One is that the diagnostic criteria are more inclusive, so more children meet the current diagnostic criteria. Second is there's just greater awareness among parents. So they go on the internet, they see the symptoms of autism, and they say, that sounds like my child, and they go and seek out expertise to find and get a diagnosis. And also pediatricians, family practice doctors are more aware, and so more kids are getting picked up that weren't getting picked up 10, 15, 20 years ago. Most of us who have been in the business a long time think that even if we take those things into consideration, there still seems to be more kids now than there were 15, 20 years ago. And that we don't understand at this point why it has increased. Clearly, we can say that it's probably not that there's been a dramatic change in the gene pool, though genes are a major factor in contributing to autism. So folks have looked towards environmental triggers, environmental events. The latest one has been the focus on preservatives, thimerosal or mercury in vaccines.
Yeah.
And currently we have little evidence. The evidence so far suggests that that is not a significant risk factor for the development of autism. Thimerosal has been taken out of almost all childhood vaccines, and with the exception of now flu vaccines, but it's still possible if parents are concerned about that to ask their pediatrician for a thimerosal-free version of the flu vaccine if they're concerned about that.
Sure, I think that that's what we do hear about, especially from those pushing don't vaccinate your children because autism could be linked to it, and you're saying it is safe to vaccinate. We can't
Right,
link it to
and
that
if there's
at this
any
point.
concern, you can always ask for the thimerosal-free vaccine. It's about the only thing that still has it in it is a flu vaccine.
Okay. Well, autism is a spectrum disorder, so I want you to explain what that means, because you have severe cases and then you have slight cases.
Sure.
So they're going to be all different levels of
Sure.
what a child might have in that.
Sure. Well, children with autism present generally fairly early on, and there's usually 2 developmental paths. In one path, that's called regressive autism, children progress either normally or near normally, so that it's not real obvious that they have symptoms at age 1, but somewhere a little bit older, approaching age 2, those children seem to lose skills, stop talking, become less interactive with their family members, and start to show more repetitive behaviors, repetitive motor movements like hand flapping, repetitive play with toys rather than making the car go and making noises, turning it over and spinning the wheel and staring at the wheel. And so that's the regressive type. And then the more common one is that their children just right from very early on seem to be different in how they interact and communicate with others. They're the kids, when you see their pictures of their birthday party and the kids are around and it's time to blow out the candles, the child is off playing by themselves. They're less likely to be interested in being cuddled as a young child. When they find an interesting toy, they may just play with it independently. A normal child, what you typically will see is they'll look at the toy, they'll get excited about it, and then they'll want to share that experience with mom or dad. So they'll show it to mom or dad, or they'll bring it and hand it to mom and dad, then take it back from them. And there's that kind of built-in social interaction that's often absent in children with autism. When the parents take their child, say, to a playground and there are other kids playing in the playground, these children are much more likely to just make a beeline for their favorite toy or favorite object on the playground, whereas a normal child will kind of look around, they'll see the other kids, get interested in what the other kids are doing, and may go to there rather than, say, the slide or where their favorite object is, just because they can do that with some other child. So you see much less of that approaching and being interested in the social aspects of play and the social aspects of communication.
Okay, so the social skills is a huge area of development that you might see lacking.
Early on, and communication are the first 2 things that you tend to see, is that the children are less likely to start even nonverbal communicate. They're less likely to wave, less likely to point when they're interested in something. They may point when they want something. Something's out of reach, they may point to get it, or they may take their parent's hand and lead them to where the thing is they want. But they're less likely to communicate just for the social experience. So that most young children, when they see a dog or see an airplane flying above and they're excited by that, will point and say, look, to their parents. Young children with autism very frequently won't do that kind of shared communication. Social communication is much more either underdeveloped or not developed at all in children with autism.
Okay. Most people know about autism from Rain Man, and this guy in Rain Man, right? He memorized the phone book, he knew numbers, so he had a remarkable gift. Is that typical for people with autism?
There are aspects of the Rain Man character that are very characteristic in how he related to other individuals. The special skills, or sometimes called savant skills, we see in children with autism much more frequently than one would expect, but it's still not the most typical thing. So that we see young children who are very good at memorizing things, some children who have what we call hyperlexia, or accentuated abilities to read. Very frequently they learn to read mechanically and can pronounce words that you and I would not see very often, would struggle with, and they do go through it very easily, but don't always understand the material that they're reading commensurate with their reading mechanics ability, so to speak. So it's not uncommon, and some have very exceptional memory skills, more so than what you see in the general public. I had a individual I worked with that was living in an institution at the time, and he knew all of the license plates for all of the people that worked there, the day they started working there, and their birth dates. Not very useful information, but very impressive that he could memorize that for about
He knew when to
700
say
people.
happy birthday,
That's right.
right.
Knew when to say happy birthday.
Okay, well that's interesting. Catching the signs early on is like with any type of disease, with cancer. With this disorder, is that key?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that's a high priority in the national research effort. It's something that we're really focused on here in Nebraska. The basic idea is the earlier we can identify these children, the earlier we can get started with intervention, and the earlier intervention starts, the more effective it is. So one of the projects that we're working on that we hope to have start pilot testing very soon and hope to do a fairly large research study on in the near future is one where we have developed an internet-based screening tool, and the goal is to have it so that parents shortly before or while they're in the waiting room for their child's wellness visit can fill out the questionnaires online. Our website will automatically score that and send the results to the pediatrician or the family practice doctor so that can be discussed. The results can be discussed with the family at the child's wellness visit. It's right now, it's in beta testing. We're using it in our own clinic, and the goal is to start to test it in pediatricians' offices in the near future.
Okay, that would be great. Now, Gail, you have 2 sons with autism. Did you know early on?
No, it's interesting. Our older son, who's 21, we started knowing something was not right when he was about 2. But it took from 2 till almost 7 for us to get the clear diagnosis. So we saw numerous different specialists through that time period, and we heard all kinds of different possibilities. But it finally clicked when he was almost 7. And we were actually homeschooling by then because we had had so much trouble with him in school and trying to find a good match. We went through, I think, 5 or 6 schools in a couple of year time period. So it was very frustrating.
I was going to say, what was that like when you heard, well, first off, you can maybe relate where he is on the spectrum disorder, but when you first heard, okay, I have a son with autism, this is going to be a challenge for the rest of his life.
Absolutely. He was not originally diagnosed with Asperger's, which is where we see him now. So it was just an autism diagnosis. And Jared had very odd language. Echolalia is very common among kids on the spectrum, where their language is mostly repetitive. They're repeating things that they've heard, cartoon characters, things out of movies. He was very good, though, at using those in different examples where it made sense. I mean, I'll never forget this one. You'll see Stars in a Minute that came out of a cartoon show, and he used it against lots of his siblings, and poor kids trying to play with him. They heard this sentence a lot when they made him mad. But that was a lot of his language. It was very odd. It was mechanical. It was very monotone, didn't have good tone, and he didn't really understand emotions very well, so he didn't add them into his own speech and didn't understand other people's intonations when they were talking to him. And then another problem that he had was just trying to, the sensory overload from lights. These kids, a lot of them see flickering in overhead lights. Sounds were excruciating for him. So if a bell went off or a buzzer went off, he would do this. He might start screaming because it would hurt his ears. And for a very long time, he told me it hurt to have his hair cut, which I truly believe that it probably did hurt him. Not in the sense that he was bleeding, but that it actually, he could feel it, where the rest of us, we don't feel that. So the sensory overload was really difficult. Trying to take him in places that had loud noises, bright lights, lots of people, like grocery stores, like malls, airports. Airports were really bad too. Those were very, very big challenges. So it was hard.
And I'm sure it was emotional, frustrating.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot that's going on. So if just kind of describe for parents who might find out that their child has autism, what's the best way to deal with it?
It is overwhelming. The statistics say that about 80% of families with a child on the spectrum will divorce. sometime while they're raising their children, which is a tremendous statistic. But I can understand why, because the days are very, very long. These children tend not to sleep well, so you may not be getting any sleep at all. And they tend to scream a good part of the time. And that's what my husband and I remember most from those very early years, was that Jared would scream from the minute he got up in the morning, practically until we went to bed. Things would just not go right, and that was his only way to tell us that things weren't right. Slam something, throw something, scream. Those were his ways of telling us that I'm upset, this isn't going right, you've taken me out of my comfort zone, you're driving home a different way. That would bother him, which is a real problem when they do road construction and close the roads. You have no choice but to have to drive home a different way. But all of those things were very frustrating for him, and it would put us on edge. You know, it really did. And it was hard to find teachers that had any experience, that understood autism. Jared was very bright. He knew his ABCs frontwards and backwards when he was 2 and could count to 100, and he can do incredible math. That is a savant skill for him. Dr. Fisher's witnessed some of his, he knows pi to 24 digits and can do cube roots and quad roots up to unbelievable numbers, you know, all in his head. And that's a great gift. But communication-wise, numbers are his communication. So he had a hard time being able to discuss emotions and feelings, and still has a very hard time with perspective taking. So he may have a hard time, you know, standing into my shoes and understanding why I may be upset about something or not feeling good. He just has a hard time being able to see outside of his own view.
And a lot of these characteristics are maybe typical, not necessarily to the severity or maybe even less than that, but just kind of for parents to get a grasp of what we're talking about. But as you mentioned, you didn't dream that he could be where he is today, going to college, living on his own. So I want, and Dr. Fisher can jump in here too, and talk a little bit about the treatment and getting a child to this point of being independent, not being institutionalized, like you mentioned that you thought might have to happen at first.
Well, I do think, as Dr. Fisher said, it is really important to get that early diagnosis, because the earlier you get that diagnosis, the sooner you can get intensive treatment, which is what Dr. Fisher's program works on, is trying to get those kids at a very young age to be able to somewhat rewire the brain, really, is what you're trying to do, is connect them through many, many repetitions of seeing the proper way to behave and inappropriate behavior to try to rewire that. And it also helps lower their frustration level if you're very early getting to their level and being able to teach them in a way that they understand. Because they do process information. Our 2 sons both process very visually. So they need visual cues and right down to picture cues, because their words, good example, our 14-year-old last night came home, he had homework. I said, "Oh, I see here you have note cards to study." He said, "No, I don't. I don't have note cards." I said, "Well, it says right here, you have note cards." He said, "No." Well, he goes into his backpack and he has strips of paper that are sheets. Well, those are not note cards to him. And he was very frustrated that he did not have note cards. Now, another kid would have understood, oh yeah, those slips of paper, those are note cards, but they're very literal, so the interpretation is not easy for them. To hear your word that may be different from their word can create a lot of frustration.
So it's probably, I'm going to have you jump in here now, Dr. Fisher, but it's probably too, a lot of parents have to be involved in this treatment. Parents have to be educated a lot, I would think, to make this really work with their children.
Parents of children with autism have a whole lot of things that they have to deal with and they have to do. They have to be parent, they have to be part teacher, they have to be part therapist, and they have to learn a whole lot of skills that most parents don't have to learn. And having them be a partner in the process of treatment, both with the therapists and with the schools, is very, very important. These are kids that, things that come naturally to most children, like being able to generalize between a note card that has 3 by 3 and is a little bit rigid to other types of piece of paper, based on the fact that they have the same function. We're using them for the same purpose, is something that most kids would get immediately without any teaching. Children with autism or children on the spectrum may have to be taught very specific things. Things like learning to imitate and learning by watching other kids. Something that's very difficult for children to learn in terms of the perspective taking very early on is words like I and you and me. What they refer to depends on who the speaker is.
Right.
There's a reference that tells you what's the correct person to attach to the word me or the word you. So when I'm talking, it's I means me. When you're talking, I is you. When I'm talking, you is you, and vice versa. And then there's a reference point based on who the speaker is. And they have a lot of difficulty with those types of words like this, that, and there, first and last, where the meaning of the word shifts depending on the context. Same thing with learning social skills. It's very difficult for kids with autism to be able to read and know when they go and want something from mom or dad, to be able to discern, well, mom's busy right now and I'm going to get a different reaction than I would if mom were not busy. Understanding those types of social cues becomes very, very difficult, and we literally have to identify very, very specific and discrete deficits for a child and teach those over and over again. Find very effective reinforcers to motivate the children to learn. Often very difficult to do with children with autism, is also very, very important. And things that you wouldn't think we need to teach have to be taught to children with autism. And so the treatment approach is fairly tedious. It's very, very time consuming. It's very, very repetitive. And it takes a long time and a lot of effort, and parents have to be really an integral part of that, both in terms of advocating for their children to get services and also participating in making sure that the things that the child learns at school, the thing that the child learns in therapy, they also practice in their real life, because that's the only way it's going to generalize.
So would you tell parents there is hope for your child?
I always try to approach it from an optimistic standpoint, but also a realistic standpoint. We're able to make a lot of progress with a lot of kids. We're not able to make sure that all kids talk. We're not able to, certainly not able to make it sure that all kids with autism are going to get to a point where they go to college, where they live independently. But through early intervention, through intensive intervention, we can make fairly dramatic gains in the majority of children who have autism.
Okay. Talk a little bit about what your treatment might look like. I guess that there's been a mention that the example of behavior, a child might be able to tie their shoes at home, but then they go to school and they're not able to do so. So I guess like different environments play a role in how a child with autism might act in one place versus another. So I'm sure that there's frustrations that are associated with that as well. So talk a little bit about your treatment and how you work through that.
Sure. Well, very frequently what we try to do is identify what are the things that the child needs to learn. There's always a big emphasis on improving their language, improving their working vocabulary, improving how they use the words, and then generalization of what they've learned to various places. So that's exactly right. When we teach a child to respond to a picture, they may do that picture and we teach a picture of a dog and they respond appropriately, and first picture is a German Shepherd, the next picture is a Border Collie, and they don't generalize to the Border Collie. So we have to work on that until we start to see that they're getting the broader concept of a dog and not just the specific picture. We want to practice things that a child learns in therapy or at school, want to practice that at home, and so words that they learn at school and in therapy, we want to make sure that the parents are working from the same list of words, that we want them to get multiple opportunities to practice in the natural environment. Things that come difficult in terms of social interactions. Every time the doorbell rings is an opportunity for a child with autism to work on their greeting skills, their eye contact. And so we encourage parents to use those naturally occurring opportunities to help build and solidify those skills.
Gail, what does that look like for you? I know that you've been an extremely involved parent with your children and helping them get to the point that they are.
It's interesting because even though I have lived with these two boys for 21 years, I still make the mistake of sometimes saying, take out the trash, and not saying, take the trash out from under your sink to the garage, put it in the trash can, and then take it to the street. I still, even though I understand what it means that he has to have things broken down, will oftentimes forget and say, take out the trash, and then I go over and wonder why it's sitting in the garage. So sometimes we, in our busy days, forget to continue to break things down and reteach and pre-teach, especially for school, I think for parents, one of the biggest things for kids to get through school is you have to pre-teach a lot of the information ahead of time. So summer is a pre-teaching time for us. We get books ahead of time, pre-teach vocabulary, pre-teach concepts that are difficult. Both of our boys' reading is more difficult, math is easy. So we pre-teach a lot of those things in the summertime when we have extra time. So you have to be a good teacher to be a parent, I think, of a child on the spectrum.
Which takes a lot of learning.
It takes a lot
part.
of learning, and
Patience.
it also has taught me patience. That's a virtue I did not have and still don't have it 100%, but they have taught me how to be more patient and how to really think through what are tasks and break them into very small steps so that they can then be successful. If I break it down enough, they can understand and they will be able to do it. Like driving a car, I would have never thought we would have gotten that far, but we started with a scooter. You know, we started very basic, went to a bike, and then from a bike, you know, you learn the rules of the road while you're riding your bike around the neighborhood. And then you get to getting in the car. I mean, step by step, you build on that, and they can learn. It just takes longer. And so you have to be patient.
We only have a couple of minutes left, but I want you to talk a little bit about, for those families who are at home, just talking about the grieving process that you go through as a parent, saying, my child, especially we were talking about a child with autism earlier that couldn't say the word mom.
That's
can't
right.
speak. For that parent, they're waiting to hear mom their whole life.
That's right.
So what is that like?
I had someone once give me this example. I thought it was a very good one. They said it's like you were packed and planning on going to Hawaii for your vacation, and all of a sudden you got to change your plans and you're going to Detroit. No, you're still going to get to go on a vacation, but it's a little bit different and you have to pack some different things. So basically what it means is you have to change your outlook, and that dream of maybe who you thought that child was going to be is going to be a different dream. Not that it's a bad dream, it's just a different one. So what I would say to the parents is you will still love that child, and that child will love you, and you will be able to have a relationship, but it's going to be maybe a little different than what you thought it was going to be. And it's okay to grieve for that, because you will be grieving about something that you lost. It was a hope and a dream that won't be, but there will be another one. And that's what I want to give parents, is that look forward to the future, that you will have a relationship with this child. It'll just be a different one.
Okay. Thank you so much,
You're
Gail,
welcome.
for being here. Dr. Wayne Fisher with the Monroe Meyer Institute. Lots of great information is on the website that's been up on your screen. You can also call 559-8863 or toll free 800-656-3937. Thank you very much for joining us for this edition of Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by Blooms in Omaha, featuring floral arrangements and gifts. And by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.